All right, we're here with Dr. Carl Ellis for our final segment, live from, well, it's live right now from the home office in Kendall, of City to City, Miami. And you're watching the Lance Word. Dr. Ellis, I have a question for you. I want to sort of set the stage, then I'll ask you the question. You have, in today's culture, social media is fairly toxic. I don't even go on Twitter. It's pretty raw there. On Facebook, good friends of mine, I have one friend called me satanic. If he watches this, he'll be mad, though I've not outed him. That was more of a private conversation. And I was simply trying to express empathy for people who are frustrated right now. You have protests, you have riots, you have looting, there's violence, you have things happening. The police are vilified in some circles. It's kind of a mess out there. And I was going to ask, what does a white person like me do in a time like this? But then I was thinking, like, as a Christian, as a pastor, I'd rather ask the question, and tell me if I'm even asking this the right way. What does a Christian need to do in a time like this? And is it important to categorize and say, this is what a white Christian should do, this is what a black Christian should do, this is what a Hispanic Christian, or is there a Christian response? Is there a Christian way to be salt and light in these times? If not, let me know. If so, how do we do it? What's the answer? What do you say when you look at this world right now, Carl? Easy. I think this would be an easy one for you.
Yeah, I don't think there should be a black or a white Christian way. I think there just should be a biblical way to do it. You take Black Lives Matter, for example. If you say Black Lives Matter, do I agree or disagree? Well, it depends on how you look at it. If we're talking about the truth, yes, absolutely. Black Lives Matter, I'm 1,000% with that. But the organization that goes by that name, I have a lot of problems with, and I oppose. Okay, and there are people out there. There are some of my Christian brothers and sisters out there who are demanding that unless we, without differentiation, unless we affirm Black Lives Matter, without differentiating between the organization and the truth, then we're racist. Well, I'm sorry. I'm not going to do that. Now, let me say this, that yes, Black Lives Matter. Now, somebody would come back at me and say, some people come in, well, all lives matter. Of course, all lives matter. But the whole thing behind Black Lives Matter is because for all these years, Black lives have not mattered as much as white lives. I have vivid memories of that. I mean, during the Civil Rights Movement, if a black person was killed, well, okay, that's so bad. But if a white person's killed, everybody got all up in arms about it. So the subliminal message that's been coming across all these decades is that Black lives do not matter as much. So when I say Black Lives Matter, I'm actually saying Black Lives Matter too. Okay. But so I'm saying that against the backdrop of the marginalization of Black lives. So there is the truth that I affirm wholeheartedly. But if I was confronted by a crowd of people asking me to chant Black Lives Matter, then I would not, and of course I would have to do that by raising my fist. I would not do anything until they told me, what do they mean by Black Lives Matter? Do they mean the truth, or do they mean the organization? If we're talking about the organization, I will never raise my hand. I will never identify with the organization, nor will I ever march under their banner or even wear a t-shirt that says that, unless it is very clear that what it means is the truth and not the organization. Because the organization actually operates as if Black lives don't matter. As a Black man, my life does not matter at all, unless I am killed by a white cop. That's it. But Black lives, the truth that Black lives matter, is cannon fodder for the organization that calls itself Black Lives Matter. Again, here we go, using all this good communication stuff for something that's poisonous. It's like Jesus describes us as wolves in sheep's clothing, okay? It's what I call the DPRK syndrome, okay? DPRK, what is that? The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, better known as North Korea. First of all, is it democratic? No. Is it of the people? No. Is it a republic? No. But why do they call it that? You see, and this is very common today, that people will label something with a good sounding label with all these, benevolent sounding words, but the truth is really the opposite. If Black lives really do matter to Black Lives Matter, the organization, then what about all these children that have been killed in these shootings? How about that retired police captain in St. Louis? How about the countless others of other African Americans that have been killed in riots and from crime and all the rest of that? How about all that? Why don't they say anything about that? Because only certain Black lives matter, and that is when they are killed by white cops, because they have an agenda to go against cops. Now, you take these police incidents, okay? All right, yeah, okay. There have been some killings out there, but if you look at the whole story, you look at this latest one. What was his name? Jacob. Anyway, you look at these things. The guy. There were some surrounding truths, like the guy was a sex offender. Okay, come on, and all the rest of that. Now, I think shooting somebody in the back 7 times is excessive. I do believe that, but you've got to look at the whole picture. It's like you can't just take one incident and just create a myth around it. Like, for example, Michael Brown. That really bothered me. Like in St. Louis, that really bothered me. But the whole idea of hands up, don't shoot, that didn't happen. That was a myth that was assigned to that, and it got everybody up in arms. You can't build a movement on mythology like that. If we're going to build a movement, let's build a movement on truth, solid truth. Now, of course, according to critical race theory, critical theory, objective truth and all that kind of stuff, that's a white thing. So we just deal with perceptions and things like that. But that's very dangerous territory, because it makes people, it puts people in a position where they're manipulated and all the rest of it. I've seen this before. And that kind of a movement is going to collapse under its own weight. So yes, yes, there are things, George Floyd should not have, the police shouldn't have kept kneeling on him the way they did, okay? But on the other hand, he was so drugged up that he was saying, I can't breathe, when he was just sitting in the police car. There are some extenuating circumstances here. I'm not saying that the police were all right and all that, but I think if we're going to come out and demonstrate and all the rest of that, let's make sure we're standing on some good, solid truth, rather than just the initial appearance of things. It's one thing that really impresses me. I think it's in Isaiah, when it talks about the coming Messiah. It says he will not judge by appearances or what he has heard. He will actually judge by what's really going on. And I think we as the body of Christ must do the same thing. Our voice may not be the first heard, but if we do it right, our voice will be the one that is heard, that the voice that lasts the longest. Does that make sense?
It does.
So I know a lot of Christians that are getting caught up on all of this because they want to do justice and all that, and I understand American Christianity has been weak on issues of justice. And so the critique that they have for American Christianity is the valid one. But on the other hand, you don't compensate for an error by introducing another error. Okay, you compensate, you deal with it by introducing the truth. So yes, I would never raise my fist if a mob came at me demanding that I raise my fist unless I say Black Lives Matter. I will never do it until they assure me what they mean by Black Lives Matter. And if they mean the organization, then I'm sorry, I won't do it. But if they mean the truth, I'll do it in a heartbeat. That's kind of where I'm at. I think all Christians should take that stance. And I think a lot of white Christians are it's like a lot of other white folks. They're so afraid of being called racist. That's like, oh my goodness, if somebody calls me a racist, I'm forever condemned. Well, look, people are going to think of you what they think of you, And even if you comply with all of their witness, all of their demands, they still might call you a racist. I mean, look what happens out in Portland. People with BLM all over their boarded up windows, and they were still broken into and burned out and all the rest of that. So I don't give into mob violence like that. I don't think anybody should. So I think, and I think people of good conscience in those mobs, it might communicate to them. It might kind of remind them, oh, well, yeah, that's right, that's true. Does that make sense? That's what it's all about, to be a witness. Mm-hmm. And so what if we get hostility? Jesus told us we're going to be, we're going to get hostility anyway. If they hated him, they'll hate us. But we have to make sure that we are very clear about how we articulate our stance, and for us to say that we totally renounce racism in all of its forms and all the rest of that. But at the same time, we also totally renounce oppression, mob rule, those kind of things. We cannot stand for that either.
Now, last thing, like, what would you say? What's something that you would tell? I'm just going to go ahead and ask now, particularly for white Christians who want to be positive. How should they approach, say, the things they post in social media, the kind of comments they say to Black friends? Like, would it be good to call a Black friend and just say, hey man, how would the conversation begin? Because sometimes this is somewhat even for me too. I have some, I was just thinking about, I've got some Black friends that I've not spoken to in a while, and I want them to know that I care, but I don't want to sound like I'm reading from the white guilt playbook.
Yeah.
Give me some advice.
Well, first of all, there is such a thing as white guilt. You know that. You know that. You know why? You know why there's white guilt?
Because there's guilt? Tell me.
Because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That includes Okay, with that out of the way, you know what I'm saying? Sure. I mean, first of all, there's a lot of my white friends feel like they're guilty just because they were born into the dominant culture or something like that. There's nothing you can do about that. It's look, your whiteness, that's just something that you have. Now, the issue is not whether or not you have whiteness. The issue is how you use it. Okay. My blackness the same way. It's something that God has given me. And so the issue is, how do I use it? Like Paul had Romanness. He was a Roman citizen, and he used it strategically at certain times when it would advance the kingdom of God. So we use these things that God has given us to advance His kingdom. But to see that you feel that you're guilty just because you have it, that has nothing to do with you. That's not your guilt at all. Yeah. Except the fact that we're all sinners. Okay. It depends. A lot of black folks are angry, and anything you do is going to, in the minds of some of my black friends, there's nothing a white person can do that's right. If they move into the neighborhood, they're accused of gentrification. If they move out, they're accused of white flight. If they don't participate in culture, they're elitist. If they participate in culture, that's cultural appropriation. You know what I'm saying? It's just like there's this mentality out there that white folks can't do anything right. They're irredeemable, nothing they can do. That's just crazy. That's absolutely crazy. But it just depends on the friends. You gotta just kind of approach them and say, hey, listen, I do take some initiative, do some reading, do some that kind of thing, and then say, I need your help in understanding this, and that would be it. From an African American point of view, there's a lot of whites who come to me and they ask me this and that and the other, or they want me to take a job or a position because of what I can do for them, as if I'm here just to serve them. Does that make sense? That's that dominant. That comes with a dominant mentality, and of course, anybody with a dominant mentality is going to have that kind of a view. So, you know, that's the one thing that you got to make sure that you dispel. Say, look, you know, I realize that you got other things to do, but I just, as a friend, I would like to get some help on this. So just make sure that you try to, as best you can, to dispel the notion that they are there just to educate you. Okay. Mm-hmm. I get this all the time. I get colleges coming at me and says, can you send us some black students? Well, why do you want black students? So they can help us out in their diversity, and they can do this for us, and they can do that for us. They can do this for us. And then I say, well, okay, what's in it for the black students?
Yeah.
And they don't even think about that. See, that's the kind of thinking that gets people upset, you know. So they should think in terms of what they can do for the black students. They should think in terms of what they can do for the community that the black students come from. That's where they should start thinking, you know. And then, of course, if white folks benefit, that's great, you know. But that's not the primary reason there. So, so that, yeah, I would approach it that way, just to make sure that you're aware, you know, that you're aware that could be a perception, that you can say, I'm not trying to do this. You know, I think that at least you may end up doing it, but the point is you're aware of that it happens, and that's not your intention. Does that make sense?
It does. And one thing sounds like what you're saying is, rather than focus on the I don't want to sound cliche here, but rather than focusing on my whiteness or their blackness, I think really one thing I think of, and tell me if I'm thinking the right way, is as a Christian, I'm supposed to consider others better than myself.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to serve my fellow man. And it said, and the scripture says, if any part of the body hurts, we all suffer.
That's right.
And so even though I may not be suffering from, I was profiled a couple times when I used to shave my head.
Yeah.
Camouflage truck, and I honestly had no idea what the optics were. I got stopped fairly regularly, but that's nothing compared to what's happened to so many others. But so I think if I take the idea that I'm a part of the same body that my friend is in, and maybe taking a position of humility, that might go a long way, rather than
That's right.
At least going off a checklist.
Right. At least you're aware of that. I mean, you know, there are people who, you know, this might sound a little subjective and all the rest of that, but there's something to be said about it. Okay, like I like to disciple young men in the hood. Okay, I'm not of that culture, even though I'm black. I didn't grow up that way. I mean, I did grow up in the hood, but I grew up in a pretty stable situation in the hood, relatively. I mean, it wasn't, you know, all that great, but and yet I don't have too much of a problem with them because they know I can feel them. Does that make sense?
It does.
I can feel where they are at. I understand them because I feel them, and there's a sensitivity that comes about. So I may not speak their language, you know, like what do we call it? We used to call it Ebonics. Now it's called Black dialect or something to that effect. But anyway, I may not speak, but I can understand it though. You know what I'm saying? My kids are fluent in it, but I may understand it.
Yeah.
I can't understand it, and they can understand English, you know, and so we communicate that way. And but so it's possible. It's really a cross-cultural situation. You know, and if you have cross-cultural sensitivities, then you'll be all right. You'll be all right. The problem comes when people don't have cross-cultural sensitivities. You know, one of the things that I hear a lot from Christians, they say, "Well, the gospel is enough. Just preach the gospel." Well, in theory, I agree with that. But my problem with people who say just preach the gospel is that they presuppose that the gospel they have is the gospel, the fullness of the gospel in the Bible. Right. And I can tell you right now that it isn't. So they say when they refer to the gospel, what they are thinking about is probably this truncated piece of the gospel that they've got, and no, that is not enough. It is not enough to preach that gospel, but it is enough to preach the biblical gospel, the full biblical gospel.
Yeah. When they say just preach the gospel, I say, well, if you would just preach the gospel, that would be a start. But
Right.
you're not. Just preach the gospel is that they a lot of people say just preach the gospel, but they're not preaching the gospel.
They're not preaching the gospel. How do we explain? I'm starting to really look at the Great Awakenings. So we've had 3 Great Awakenings in this country. And I'm looking at those Great Awakenings, and I'm starting to have doubts if they were really for real. Because if this was a real Great Awakening of people really coming to God and everything, why didn't it result in the breakdown of the slavery situation, or the breakdown in Jim Crow and all the rest of that? What is that? From my point of view, it doesn't look very good. All those really Great Awakenings, what about all this, 100 years ago or so, maybe 120 years ago, America was predominantly broadly evangelical. Well, why didn't that have an effect on all these issues, all these sins, of segregation and racism and all the rest of that? I just doubt the validity or genuineness of it. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't the case, but I'm just saying that I don't have a very high view of it. Let's put it that way. How do you have a whole region of the country being called the Bible Belt, when, from my point of view, it was the Jim Crow Belt? Does that make sense?
It does.
How do you do that?
It's interesting you say that, because you talked about some folks today are trying to be activists, and they're coming with their activism, but they have a shaky foundation on which to build.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's part of our American evangelical experience, that we're coming with this great truth, but on a foundation of
shaky
sin.
That's right. So American evangelicalism, if you would, if I could say so, American evangelicalism is heretical in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you see that. You see the heresy of it. So what you want to do is you want to address that. But what some of my friends are doing, they're buying into another heresy to address that heresy. And I'm saying, no, that's not good enough. We don't accept a heresy to fight another heresy. We accept the biblical truth, and you fight all heresy. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So what's happening is that these far left Christian types that I know, these social justice warriors, and look, I'm 100%. I totally sympathize with them. They want to see social justice. I want to see social justice.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when I say social justice, I don't mean in the way that has been defined by Marxists and all the rest of that. I'm saying the word social and the word justice, dictionary definition, you put those together. Okay, so that's what I mean by that. So I'm all in favor of that. But the problem is that they have taken they're using the wrong means to achieve that. And because if they use the means that they're using now, then they're going to end up they're going to have less social justice than they did in the first place.
Let me segue here. I want to do a slight transition, because we're just about out of time, and
okay.
I want to be a teaser for the next time we have you on. You have said before, Carl, and I don't want to totally unpack this because it's not really my thoughts exactly, but the gospel in Scripture, it's like a gourmet meal provided by a Michelin chef in the finest restaurant. But there are people using elements of it that made their way to the dumpster, and so they're taking parts of this meal, but rather than giving us the full meal on the silver platter, they're bringing us the scraps that made their way to the dumpster. And these scraps, because they come from something glorious, the scraps are truly amazing compared to what else is out there. But it doesn't measure up to what the scraps are from.
Right. And also, you get sick from those scraps.
You can get sick from those scraps, yeah, even though they had a good source. How does what I just described tell us what I'm talking about? Tell the others what I'm talking about. Tell me just a little bit about the book you're working on next, and give us something to whet the appetite for the next time we have you on.
The book I'm working on next is will be a standalone book, but it could very easily function as a sequel to Free at Last. Okay, like Free at Last, it's a theological analysis. Like Free at Last was a theological analysis of the African American experience. So the new book is going to be a theological analysis of the African American experience since Free at Last was. The Free at Last kind of traces the gospel and the African American experience through the antebellum South and all that. The new one will kind of trace it through the antebellum North and into the day. And I'll give I'll be dealing with critical theory, critical race theory, intersectionality, things like that. The whole issue of identity. What's the nature of identity? How do we have a stable identity? Things like that. It's going to deal with. I'll even have a segment on Tupac. I'll point out that Malcolm X was to my generation what Tupac was for the Gen Xers. Okay, both articulated what I consider cultural core concerns. And by the way, the cultural core concerns that Malcolm X articulated were the very same things that the church, the African American church, was dealing with in the 19th century. All right, and so I make some connections. I try to show where the church is today, where we need to go. It's those kind of things. I'm kind of working off the working title. I don't know if it will actually be that, but the working title is Thug Spirituality. Okay. Now the reason I say that is because what Tupac tried to do, he tried to redefine what a thug was. He said a thug is not a criminal. A thug is somebody who's born with everything that going against him and is able to overcome all that and achieve great things. That's how he tried to redefine the thug. And so also on the basis of that, he put out the idea of thug life, you see. Okay. But of course, his worldview was not robust enough to carry that new meaning. And so when people heard that, they took thug in the other way and they thought they considered it a justification of criminal behavior. But I lament the fact that I wished I could have met Tupac. I wish I could have talked to him, because given his definition of a thug, I could have introduced him to the greatest thug that ever existed. That's namely Jesus. He was born with everything going against him, ethnic cleansing and all the rest of that. And he was able to overcome all of that, even death itself. He defeated the works of the devil. If that isn't a thug, I don't know what it is. So anyway, the new book is gonna be those kind of things. And the one other thing, I look at the African American church and I identify what I consider 7 basic models of the African American church, and kind of show where we are and that kind of thing. So that's generally what the new book's going to be about.
Well, thank you.
People don't know what to do with it, though. That's the thing. It hasn't been published yet because they don't know how to market it. And I got people all over the internet begging me to market it all the time. Yeah. So,
well, we'll figure that out. Maybe we'll be a small piece of that effort. Small piece.
All right.
Take a big piece one day, but right now.
Yeah, so on the title. So what Tupac was trying to do, he was trying to introduce a thug spirituality. You got it? You see what I'm saying? And it was a cry for cultural wisdom. That's what it was. But he didn't live to see the day when it would ever happen. And and just like Malcolm X had a great vision. But Malcolm didn't realize that the basis of his outlook were truths that were developed in Christian theology in the 19th century. So.
Now, Carl, if somebody wants to find out more, you have a blog. Where do we find your blog, Carl?
The blog is called Prophets of Culture. Just Google Prophets of Culture. I think the actual website is Dr. Carl Ellis Jr.blogspot.com or something like that. But just Google.
We'll have links below the video.
Okay. Okay. and you'll see some of my thoughts. And then on there's a link to my wife's blog too, so you can.
And tell us. Don't tell us everything. It would take forever. But for those of you who don't know, Carl Ellis outkicked his coverage. As great as this man is, Karen is a treasure. A treasure.
Incredible.
And
yeah.
We admire Carl. I admire Carl almost more for the fact that he was able to get her to say yes than anything else he's accomplished. It's a great accomplishment. And where can we hear from the lovely Mrs. Ellis, Dr. Ellis?
Yes. She's an up and comer. She'll be. She's a voice to be reckoned with. I mean, she's on her final stages of her dissertation right now, but she's going to be. She is already a voice to be reckoned with, but she's really plowing some new ground, which is really we're both really excited about it. So.
And not just a written voice, but a professional singing voice from the past as well. I've been blessed with a singing bride as well. And
I got clipped from her TV show and stuff, you know, when she was on TV and all that. I played them in the middle of the night. She doesn't like to see herself on camera, but anyway, yeah, she's incredible.
Well, we'll have a link to Mrs. Ellis as well. Thank you so much for being here, and for those who are still with us, Free at Last. The Gospel in the African American Experience, part of the Signature, did I get that right? The Signature series from InterVarsity Press. This is the cover you want when you look it up, whether you go to Amazon, InterVarsity, or just Google Free at Last, Carl Ellis, Signature. This is the one you want. It's a great starting point. Go to Dr. Ellis's blog. The information will be below in the video link. And thanks so much for being here. Thank you for watching. And thank you, Dr. Ellis.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be